All right, welcome to Hoops Tonight here at The Volume. Happy Monday, everybody. Hope all of you guys had an incredible weekend. Got a jam-packed Monday show for you guys. I've got 4 big takeaways from this weekend off the top. And then at the tail end of the show, like we always do on Monday, our power rankings as we go through the top 10 teams in the league. You guys know the drill. Before we get started, subscribe to the Hoops Tonight YouTube channel so you don't miss any more of our videos. Follow me on Twitter at _JasonLT so you guys don't miss show announcements. Don't forget about our podcast feed, wherever you get your podcasts under Hoops Tonight. Don't forget it's also helpful if you leave a rating and a review on that front. We also have brand new social media feeds on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook where we're releasing content throughout the year. Make sure you guys follow us there. And last but not least, like we do every Friday, we're going to be doing a mailbag. So drop questions in the YouTube comments for the mailbag by the time we get there on Friday. All right, let's talk some basketball. So my number one big takeaway from the weekend, the Los Angeles Lakers have reinvented themselves as a staunch defensive team. This team has pretty much only had weird seasons ever since they made the decision to trade for Russell Westbrook, whether it's been like that first Russ year where it's a lot of injuries or that second Russ year where it's more injuries, but then you're kind of a completely different team in the post-deadline phase of the season to the quitting on Darvin Ham in the middle of the season for a month to everything that went wrong in that late November, early December stretch this year. But this might actually be the weirdest thing that I've seen the Lakers do post-trading for Russell Westbrook. In the Lakers' first 23 games before this 4-1 stretch, they were 26th in defensive rating, meaning they allowed the 5th most points in the league per 100 possessions, 25th in defensive rebounding percentage, 27th in fast break points allowed. Meaning basically for the first 23 games of the season, for more than a fourth of the season, they were getting absolutely crushed in every athleticism category. Defending, rebounding, and running the floor. Those are all things that come down to your willingness to compete athletically on the floor. Bottom 6 in all 3 of those categories. In the Lakers' last 5 games, they are the number 1 defense in the league, allowing just 99.2 points per 100 possessions. They're the only team in the league allowing less than 100 points per 100 possessions in that span. They are 9th in defensive rebounding percentage and 10th in fast break points allowed. So from bottom 6 in all 3 categories to number 1 in defense and top 10 in all 3 categories. Most impressively, they've done it against teams that specifically attack their weaknesses. In this stretch of games, they've had to play their last 3 against Memphis and Sacramento. Those are all top 10 offenses predicated on speed, which is a weakness for the Lakers, right? And especially in transition, weaknesses for the Lakers. And they shut both offenses down and kept both teams out of transition. That's a Memphis Grizzlies team that's been kicking everybody's butt, and the Lakers kind of led them wire to wire. And it mostly comes down to the team rediscovering its competitive nature. Like, there are some schematic things that have changed. Max Christie is starting now, right? The Lakers have been more picky with their switching. Essentially, they're not just conceding guard switches unless it's necessary, meaning unless there's actually a good pick that is set. And then usually if there's an action between a guard and AD, instead of switching that action, which they had done in the past, they're having that guard chase over the top and AD's meeting them at the level, a more traditional pick and roll coverage. This has allowed Anthony Davis to be at the rim more frequently, which is important for protecting the rim and for defensive rebounding. One of the things with the Lakers, I'm actually generally a believer in switching as a scheme. I think it stagnates teams and baits them into a lot of bad basketball. But in order for switching to function, you need 5-man units that are generally pretty athletic across the board. The reason why is teams are going to attack switching by picking on mismatches and by doing damage on the offensive glass, right? So like you switch, you get a bad guard like D'Lo onto the ball and they're looking to attack, right? That's a mismatch. Or, okay, Anthony Davis switched the ball screen and now he's on their best guard, but now that guard is taking Anthony Davis away from the play and now you don't have rim protection or anybody that can clean up the defensive glass, right? Like the Lakers, in terms of their personnel, should be more picky with their switching. They have been more picky with their switching, and that has helped. Those things have certainly played a role, but by far the biggest change has just been in their competitive nature, right? Like a tweak like that's not the difference between the Lakers being one of the very worst defensive teams in the league and being the best defensive team in the league. That's not the kind of difference that'll come from that kind of change. That helps but most of it comes down to they're just fighting. The NBA is like a never-ending onslaught of good basketball teams pitted against you. There's always just another one waiting, right? And you have to be ready to compete every night. The Lakers went through an extended stretch where they were literally not competing, and they got rolled a bunch. There are 5 factors that I think have led to this turnaround for the Lakers. Number 1, embarrassment. The loss in Miami in particular was one of the low points of the LeBron AD era. I wasn't the only one being very critical of them. It was a pretty big story. Like, you guys spent all training camp passive-aggressively shitting on Darvin Ham for him not being competent, and now you're openly quitting in the first quarter of an important game against a mediocre team in the Miami Heat and getting smacked by 40 for your 6th loss in 8 tries. That was embarrassing. Embarrassment is a natural motivator. Number 2, there is a trickle-down effect that comes from minor schematic changes when they lead to success. It's like momentum. We talked about it earlier. The switching wasn't a good fit for this particular roster, at least to do it as much as they had been doing. You make a tweak in your approach, suddenly you start getting more stops. You start getting more stops, players start to believe in the scheme more. Players start to believe in the scheme more, they start to buy in more. Suddenly you're getting even more effort, even more stops. Suddenly you start to win some games. Now it starts to believe, the roster starts to believe even more, and it can really turn into a momentous kind of thing, right? So there's no doubt that the schematic changes have led to some of the turnaround in the competitiveness of the Lakers. 3, several Lakers are just playing better basketball than they did to start the season. I talk about this concept all the time on the show, but sometimes the best solution for a struggling basketball team is guys just have to play better. You know? Like, it's crazy for the Milwaukee Bucks this year what happened when Giannis and Brook were just like, hey, what if you and I just go back to completely shutting teams down on defense? And what if that just snowballs into a bunch of good stuff for our team? And that's what happened, right? Same thing's happening for the Lakers. LeBron James, a big part of the 2-6 stretch was LeBron was terrible. He wasn't scoring much. He wasn't scoring very efficiently. He was turning the ball over too much, and he wasn't engaged defensively or on the glass. I think he got embarrassed by that whole thing. He took 10 days off, and when he came back, he just started playing super hard. This is something I talked about a lot during LeBron's slump. Those of you guys who followed the show during that time will remember this, but I talked about one of the best ways to get out of a slump is to build momentum and confidence by making winning plays. LeBron is still huge. LeBron is still fast. He's still an excellent NBA athlete with a ton of skill and IQ. So if he just is focused and plays hard, it's kind of impossible for him to have a bad game because of all the little things he can do that don't really rely on variance, right? He just had to lock in and do his job. And so he starts playing hard. All of a sudden, he starts to feel better about himself. He's almost playing angry right now. And even though the box score production hasn't been that good since he's come back, he's been awesome. His box score numbers in the last 3 games are more or less the same as they were in the stretch before, but he is so much more engaged on defense, so much more engaged on the glass, so much more focused and making better decisions on the offensive end of the floor. LeBron has been really good. Again, with LeBron, it always goes beyond the box score. You could go back to when he was struggling and it's like, oh, he's still, 23, 8 and 7 or whatever it was that he was averaging. It's all good numbers, right? But like when LeBron's not engaged, it can really be draining on a team. He's been so engaged since he's come back, and it's made a world of difference. One stat to demonstrate this difference. In LeBron's first 22 games this year, he averaged just 1.1 stocks per game. That's steals plus blocks, right? In his last 4 games, he's averaging 3.3 stocks per game. So he's tripled his output on steals and blocks. And again, it even goes well beyond the box score in terms of the efforts that he's making, communicating the rotations that he's making. I think it's the hardest I've seen LeBron play consistently 3 games in a row in like a mid-season stretch like this in December since the 2021 team. It's one thing to do it opening week. It's one thing to do it right before the playoffs. But LeBron, for the most part in this time of year, is very selective with his effort, and he's playing really hard every night. That has been working. Max Christie, very uneven start to the season. He's been in the starting lineup for 5 games now. He's starting to find his footing on defense. He'd struggled on defense to start the year, and he's shooting 43% from 3 in this 5-game span. He's just being solid in his starting role. Gabe Vincent. Gabe Vincent has always been a rock-solid role player who does his job on both ends of the floor, but he's kind of small. So when he's not hitting shots, he's not good enough on defense to overcome those that issue with him making shots. He's a guy that, like, when he's hitting, and in his last 9 games, he's hitting. In his last 9 games, Gabe is 49% from 3 on 4 attempts. Suddenly, he looks like a very useful role player because he does his job. He's a legitimate two-way player. He just hadn't hit shots the entirety of his Lakers tenure up until this recent stretch. Rui Hachimura, 3 blocks and 22 rebounds in his last 3 games. He's been a huge part in their defensive uptick. He also had a huge tap-out rebound to save Anthony Davis after he missed a couple free throws against Sacramento. Austin Reeves, he was out of the lineup for the last 3 losses in that ugly stretch. Getting him back has been huge. In his 4 games since returning, he's averaging 20 points, 5 rebounds, and 6 assists. That's damn near all-star level production. D'Angelo Russell. D'Lo can be an infuriating player sometimes, especially when he's not hitting shots because of all of his shortcomings. In his first 17 games this year, he had 6 3-point attempts per game and only made 28% of them. In his last 10 games, on 6 attempts, he's hitting 42% of them. A lot more of D'Lo's upside is on display. And then AD has massively improved on the defensive end in this stretch by virtue of that scheme change that we talked about and also him just kind of devoting some resources to that end of the floor. In this 5-game stretch, AD is averaging 14.4 rebounds per game with 1.4 steals and 3.6 blocks per game. So again, a bunch of key Lakers are playing better. And as a result of that, it amounts to an influx of talent, and you're going to make yourself look like a better team. 4, LeBron and AD are now primarily directing their energy towards the defensive end. Scoring and efficiency has dipped for both of them, but both of them have been amazing on defense, and the roster is actually more capable of supporting LeBron and AD on the offensive end. So it's actually the smartest way for them to use their resources. Austin and D'Lo are stepping up on the offensive end. They're getting enough buckets to win. We're going to talk about their offense in a minute. Their offense is actually dead last in this span as well. So it's been like a complete and total trade-off. And that's going to take some... That's going to be something that takes some time because, again, like when you go from like not competing on defense to competing on defense, it's going to drain your legs. They've got to condition themselves now to be in a position where they can do that while also having the legs they need to make shots. But that's the exciting part because this team does have the potential to be good on both ends if they get to the point where that's a habit for them. And then number 5, and this is probably the most concerning part for me in terms of how I look forward for the Lakers. The schedule has not been demanding on them in this stretch in terms of wear and tear. That's the big question mark. Like, they've played these 5 games, this 4-1 stretch, over a 16-day span. There's 11 rest days mixed in. As we mentioned earlier, the NBA is an onslaught of good basketball teams over and over and over again in the normal parts of the schedule that don't center around the in-season tournament, right? Like, the schedule stays tough. The Lakers have Detroit tonight. They have the size to make things tough on LeBron and AD. They beat the Lakers earlier this year, if you remember. At Golden State on Christmas Day. That's a road game versus a team that has a lot more perimeter speed than the Lakers. That's a tough matchup for them. Sacramento on Saturday. It's really hard to beat a team 4 times in a row. And again, this is the same team that was 4-0 against the Lakers last year. The Cavs, they beat the shit out of the Lakers earlier this year in Cleveland. Second week of January, they have road games at Houston and at Dallas. So like, this is going to go back to playing every other night against good teams, and this is where it's going to come down to their willingness to hang on to the rope, right? Like, I said when I had my Lakers meltdown a few weeks ago that they would have more good stretches this year. That's all this is. I knew this was going to happen. Even when I was bitching and moaning about that Heat game, I said they will have more good stretches this year. They will have stretches where they beat good teams. This is one of those stretches. But any sort of ambition this team has to make a deep playoff run is contingent on their commitment to the daily process, even when it's not easy, even when you're not playing 5 games in 16 days. It will only get harder as the season progresses, and they need to hang on to the rope for a long time before I have any sort of real belief in this team again. So again, they're on a good stretch, 4-1, defending like crazy, a lot of exciting stuff. But championship teams don't do it for a week and a half or for 2 weeks. They do it month after month after month until they get to April. And by virtue of that process, they are so buttoned up that they are so good with their execution for 2 straight months that they put themselves in a position to win the title. This is not a 2-week journey. There are 4 months, I think, roughly, until the playoffs start. They've got to figure out how to get this into an extended part of their basketball identity. I am skeptical, but a good job over the last couple of weeks. It's the most wonderful time of the year for getting in on all of the hoops, football, and hockey action at DraftKings Sportsbook. In the season of giving, we're being gifted college football and basketball, pro football and basketball, and pro hockey too. Almost 24/7. So many games every day, so many opportunities to place your first bet. Try betting on something simple like picking a team to win. Go to the DraftKings Sportsbook app and place your bet. Current Super Bowl winners on DraftKings right now, the Detroit Lions at plus 260 and the Kansas City Chiefs at plus 425. And here's a gift for all new customers. Bet $5 to get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code HOOPS. That's HOOPS. That's code HOOPS for new customers to get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins when you bet just $5. Happy holidays from DraftKings. The crown is yours. Second big takeaway from the weekend. There is no point in taking standings victory laps in the Western Conference unless you can separate from that group that's in the middle of the standings. I saw a lot of Laker fans after the Sacramento game the other night. They're like, we have the 9th best record in the league. We're the 5 seed in the West. And in the Western Conference, only sustained success is going to give you any sort of real breathing room. Even without playing, they've dropped to the 10th best record in the league and 6th in the West. Everyone in that 5 to 11 group in the West is separated by 1.5 games. So to be clear, I think it's the Suns that are at 11. The 11 seed Suns feels like a catastrophe, right? They're one good week away from being the 5 seed. The Denver Nuggets, they're the 5 seed right now. Looks great. They're one bad week away from being the 11 seed. So no one needs to be taking victory laps over this crazy shuffling that's taking place week by week in that middle portion of the Western Conference. All of those teams have significant flaws. Some more than others, sure. Denver's got Nikola Jokic. That's going to be a big advantage, right? But if any of those teams are actually going to win the title, they're going to need to find a way to build separation from that group. It's Denver, the Lakers, Golden State Warriors, the Clippers, the Spurs, the Timberwolves, and the Suns. That's that group. And all of them are flawed. The Nuggets, they either need Jamal Murray to keep improving the way he has been, or they'll need to make a trade for a reliable perimeter scorer. They're also going to have to get more consistent with their defensive effort. A couple of pretty mediocre teams that they've played against recently that have scored on them relatively easily. The Lakers, they need a trade or an upgrade at the 2 or 3 in their starting lineup. And they need consistent commitment to the work throughout the regular season. The Warriors, they need to trade for a secondary scorer behind Steph. The Clippers, they need Kawhi Leonard to come back and play at an MVP level. The Spurs, they probably should start considering making a hyper-aggressive trade. If they made a deal for De'Aaron Fox, they could enter into a contention. We're going to talk about the Spurs here in just a minute. The Timberwolves, they got to find a way to create space for their stars so they can attack the rim. In this 2 and 3 stretch in their last 5 games, Julius Randle and Anthony Edwards are combining to attempt just 6.6 shots per game in the restricted area. Jason Tatum by himself in the same span is attempting 8 shots per game in the restricted area. There's no space to operate within Minnesota. They've got to figure that out. That's going to probably be a more substantial shuffle at some point this season. Then the Suns. The Suns are allowing the Suns are allowing over 122 points per 100 possessions in the 4 games since KD came back from injury. They just aren't defending. So all of those groups, they might, by virtue of the schedule or by virtue of a couple role players getting hot or by virtue of just brief moments where they're more locked in than usual, might rack together a 3-0, 4-0 week and gain ground in the standings. But all of that is going to continue to get jumbled. And really, for me, is if any team is going to make a substantial playoff run this year, meaning winning at least 2 rounds, they're going to have to separate themselves from that pack in the regular season. That will be the way they demonstrate that they've improved in the necessary areas in order to make that kind of run. If none of them do, all of those teams are going to be eliminated in the first 2 rounds by better teams. Again, could they beat a Houston or a Memphis, one of the flawed younger teams at the top? Sure. But teams like Dallas and OKC, They're beating all these teams in a playoff series with the type of basketball they're playing right now. If you want to get through one of those teams, and you might have to get through both of them, you're going to have to play better basketball, and it's going to have to come through a combination of roster upgrades and improved attention to detail and competitiveness over the course of the regular season. That, to me, is the dead giveaway. Who's going to be that 5 seed? Who's going to be the 5 seed that separates and builds margin between them and the rest of that pack? That, to me, is a team that is serious. If you're in that pack when we get to April, I'm going to have a hard time believing that you can win multiple playoff rounds. Number 3. Victor Wembanyama is already good enough to justify the Spurs getting aggressive and going for it. In Victor Wembanyama's last 13 games, he's averaging 30 points, 10 rebounds, and 5 assists with 4.5 stocks per game on 51% from the field, 38% from 3, and 85% from the line. The Spurs are 9-4 in those 13 games when Victor plays. He's shooting 38% from 3 on 11 attempts per game. Has this habit of just rising and firing over guys, even in clutch time. And all you can do is really just pray he misses. He's 4 for 9 on clutch threes over this span too. Doing a ton of damage in pick and pop. He's popping almost exclusively. This was a big thing that stood out to me over the course of the last couple of weeks. On his last 20 shot attempts that have come in out of pick and roll as the roll man, 15 of them have been threes. He's popping above the break almost exclusively in ball screens. And then from there, he's looking to shoot or to drive closeouts. He's getting 1.22 points per roll man possession for the season. That ranks 5th among all NBA players to log at least 75 roll man possessions this season. He's up to 39% overall on unguarded catch and shoot jumpers. So like if he's got his feet set, feels like it's going in. He's also, in addition to the pick and pop stuff, he's doing a ton of damage out of the triple threat around the elbows. So like sometimes it'll be like a ball screen switch and he'll take the guard down to the elbow. But even in his like regular matchup, if he likes that matchup, he'll just catch around the elbow. What they'll usually do is they'll load up his left-hand side so that he's got, a bunch of bodies over there, but then they'll just put like one guy in the strong side corner. So like it creates a little bit more space for him. And he's basically ripping through to the right and then turning back over his right shoulder. And he's doing a lot of step through moves, a lot of like spinning into a pump fake and then stepping through and all that is for a step through. If you imagine like my right foot's my pivot, right? And I bring my left foot around and plant it for a fadeaway. But I pump fake and then further bring that foot around, I can step all the way through towards the basket. He's got such a long stride there that he's like turning like he's going to fade at like 12 feet. And then when he's doing a step through move, he's getting easy layups because of how much ground he can cover towards the rim there. But doing a ton of damage around the elbows. He's ran 189 post-ups and ISOs this year, including passes, and it's generated 191 points. So that's over a point per possession as a static half-court initiator. Again, a major benchmark for young shot creators in this league. He's not even old enough to order a beer yet, guys. And he's playing at a surefire top 10 level at this point. And right now, off of Wemby, it's a lot of like kind of random contributions. They have 7 guys averaging double figures for the Spurs in this span, but nobody is averaging over 17 points per game in these last 13 games that Wemby's played. So like, if I was the Spurs, I'd be keeping an eye on the De'Aaron Fox situation. They have the assets to make a real push for him if he becomes available. The Kings had another disappointing blowout loss at home to the Indiana Pacers last night. I also think he's just the perfect guard to partner with Victor Wembanyama. Like, yes, De'Aaron Fox is 27 years old, but that's in the heart of his prime with a solid, 5 to 7 good years left. And Wemby is good enough to lead a championship team right now. 30, 10, and 5 on his level of efficiency with what he does defensively. He's a bona fide top 10 player in the league at this point. So the timeline is now. Forget about the age. Yeah, he's 20. Yeah, Fox is 27. He's 7 years older. Who cares? He's good enough to actually help Wemby win games right now. I also think Fox is the perfect pick and roll partner for him. It's difficult to switch, right? Fox is too fast for bigs, and Wemby can punish guards around those elbows with the face-up game that we talked about earlier. He's got a lot of experience playing with a good pick and roll partner in Domantas Sabonis, and he's got a lot of experience feeding the pocket, which is something that's important in that matchup, right? His ability to pop as a more deadly shooter will create more driving space for De'Aaron Fox, which is something that has been an issue with Sabonis at times as teams kind of ignore him, right? It's just an easy fit. Fox defensively is at his best when he's able to be aggressive with ball pressure rather than trying to contain. It's another thing that makes him a little funky fit with Sabonis, right? Like with Victor Wembanyama, you couldn't script a better type of fit defensively for him to be able to be aggressive on the ball, to try to force deflections and turnovers, knowing that he's got the greatest mess cleaner upper behind him, right? In addition to that, I just think De'Aaron Fox is awesome. I had him in my top 25 last summer. He's had a rough start to the season shooting the ball, but I think he's a good shooter. And again, they mixed everything up again by bringing in DeRozan. It's kind of tweaked things. He's specifically good at hitting short to mid-range jump shots, and it's a major weapon to have in your bag for clutch situations. As a matter of fact, De'Aaron Fox is leading the league in clutch field goals made with 25. Second place is 20, so he's got a pretty hefty lead there. He's shooting 48% from the field and 39% from three in clutch situations. I think De'Aaron Fox and Victor Wembanyama could compete for a title right away. I think that's the move that they need to look to make if it becomes available this year. Number 4, my last big takeaway from this weekend, the Indiana Pacers are starting to look like the Indiana Pacers. They've won 5 out of 6. They're 4th in offense over that span. Defense was the big issue in the early part of the season. Andrew Nembhard was out of the lineup, but also their frontline guys weren't doing a very good job. They've been 9th in defense over this 6-game span. Very equal opportunity on offense. Like no one's averaging 20 points a game over this span, but 7 guys are averaging double figures. Tyrese Haliburton's looking more like himself because his shot is falling. He's shooting 44% from 3 on 9 attempts over this span. He's also averaging 19 points and 10 assists. That's more in line. It's not like the whatever it was, 24 and 14 he was averaging or what he was at the beginning of last season, but he's getting a little closer to what we grow to expect from Tyrese Haliburton. He also has 6 steals and 6 blocks in this span. He was one of the big culprits in their bad defense in the early part of the year. He's just competing a little bit better. That's really the thing. The whole team is competing on defense. Andrew Nembhard is back now. He has stabilized them at the point of attack defensively. I talked with the Nerd Sesh guys about how I expected the Pacers to have some potential to turn their defensive around because they just have good defensive players. Like Pascal Siakam's a good defensive player. He did an amazing job on DeMar DeRozan last night, right? Like Miles Turner, he's capable of being a very good defensive player. He did a number on Domantas Sabonis last night, right? So like you get a good point of attack defender with a good 4-5 defensively, you should be pretty good defensively. As long as you can get Ben Mathurin and Tyrese Haliburton to do their job, which they have. Thomas Bryant has come in and kind of provided some stability at the backup center spot. I covered him with the Lakers. He's a really fun offensive player. Like he plays super hard. He runs the floor super well. You guys have already seen that. He's legit good at like finishing in traffic for a guy who's mostly a below the rim player. He just has good at angles and he's got good touch and he's a pretty solid jump shooter. He's got his defensive limitations, but he will bring some stability to that spot. The Pacers are playing some serious basketball, but their schedule is about to get really tough. They're just 2 games back of the 5 seed, but their next 5 games at Golden State, home for Oklahoma City, at Boston, and then home for Milwaukee. So definitely a tough stretch for them coming up on the schedule. Getting into our power rankings. And again, all odds are provided by our partner, DraftKings. Number 10, the Los Angeles Lakers, 4-1 in their last 5 games. Number 1 defense in the league over that span. We covered them in the opening segment, so we won't go any further here. Lakers fans who are looking for a deep dive on the Lakers, you can find that just by clicking on our full episode for this Monday show. And you'll it was the first segment that I went into, and I did like a solid 15, 20 minutes on them, so you can see them there. The Lakers right now, if you want to make a bet, they're plus 3,500 to win the title, plus 1,800 to win the Western Conference. Number 9, the Denver Nuggets, 2-1 week. The Nuggets have been playing some lower level competition on the road, and they've been playing down to that competition, and it's led to a lot of close games. They beat the Kings in a classic Nuggets walk down. They score on 7 possessions in a row down the stretch. The Jokic Murray 2-man game scores on 4 consecutive possessions down the stretch, and Jamal Murray hits the eventual game winner. They lose to the Blazers on a game-winning layup by Anthony Simons. Really weird sequence. The Blazers were attacking with dribble penetration from Anthony Simons off of the right wing, and they went a bunch of times down the stretch. Earlier on in clutch time, they were going at Jamal Murray, but it was kind of like this weird sequence where like they were loading up on Anthony Simons' left hand. Like Jokic, when he was offering his help, he was kind of coming higher up the lane line. They were doubling. So like they got Jamal Murray on Anthony Simons. Anthony Simons loads up to drive, and they sent the double from Russell Westbrook on Anthony Simons' left-hand side. and and Anthony Simons is driving to the right. And it was kind of like a weird foreshadowing moment because Jamal Murray slides over and takes the contact and gets a really good contain on Anthony Simons, and they end up getting a stop. But on the game winner, they end up going back to that same action, but they go at Russ instead of Jamal. Same sort of thing. Jamal Murray's coming to double from the left-hand side. Jokic is kind of high up the lane line. Aaron Gordon is staying home in the strong side corner, and Russell Westbrook is opened up to the left. Like, straight up, opened up, with his body just giving a right-handed drive. Well, guess what? Anthony Simons just hit a right-handed drive and went right down the lane. Jokic wasn't even close to being able to get over there in time and gets a layup. So, like, there's a lot of blaming going on there. There's a lot of, like, oh, Jokic can't protect the rim. A lot of, like, Russell Westbrook can't guard on the perimeter. I thought everyone had blood on their hands there. Like, Russ, you can't just get, like, cleanly toasted. You got to do something to flatten out that drive. Nikola Jokic, your job's to protect the rim and help. So, like, you got to do better than you did there. And Mike Malone, why are you sending all the help from the left side while also funneling him to the right? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, your team defense isn't really set up there. So, like, that ended up being a really disappointing loss. And then they bounced back by beating the Pelicans in overtime. Another huge Jamal Murray shot to send the game to overtime there. And that's really the huge development with Denver if you're looking for positivity. Jamal's starting to get his legs back underneath him. In his first 17 games this year, he averaged 18 points, 4 rebounds, and 6 assists on 42% from the field and 33% from three. In his last 4 games, 25, 5 and 6, 46% from the field and 39% from three. This brings me to, like, the kind of trade topic with Denver. There's been a lot of talk about making a move with Michael Porter Jr., going after someone like a Zach LaVine. If Jamal continues this trajectory and gets to the point where he's basically averaging 23 to 25 points per game efficiently from here to the trade deadline, I would not make an aggressive trade. There's just no point. Jamal being Jamal is all they really need. Outside of that, I would bet on continuity in this weird Western Conference with all these flawed teams. For every team, you want to bet on continuity and just getting sharper, or making some sort of trade for aggressive upside, and it depends on the team in that tier of teams. For me, for Denver, if Jamal Murray keeps this up to the deadline, I'd bet on continuity. We've just seen how devastating this team can be in the playoffs when Jokic and Murray are at that special level. Last year, neither of them were. If both of them are this year, you're right back in it. The Nuggets right now, plus 1,500 to win the Western Conference, plus 1,500 to win the title, plus 700 to win the Western Conference. Number 8, the Memphis Grizzlies. 2-0 week. They beat the living shit out of the Warriors on Thursday. They hold Steph Curry and Draymond Green without a made field goal in 24 minutes. Got a nice win in Atlanta without John Morant. 7 guys in double figures in that game. Excellent defense last week. They had a 95.8 defensive rating in the 2 games. That was the best out of any NBA team last week. Starting to look like the regular season buzzsaw that we talked about the Grizzlies being before the season. They are now plus 2,500 to win the title, plus 1,100 to win the Western Conference. Number 7, the Houston Rockets. Super light week. They had games against the Pelicans and the Raptors. Struggled a bit with the Raptors last night, but they pulled away with their bench group in the fourth quarter. A couple guys who haven't had much opportunity this year, and Jason Tate and Cam Whitmore ended up leading the charge for their bench unit in the early fourth quarter. A lot of downhill force. Jason Tate in the half court, bringing downhill force and ball screens, and then Cam Whitmore in transition. He also had a little bully ball possession in the half court as well. Another light week this week for the Rockets. They're at Charlotte, at New Orleans, and then home for Minnesota and Miami. If they go 3-1 that week, they'll be in a good spot in the standings. The Rockets plus 6,500 to win the title, plus 2,200 to win the conference. That's actually the worst odds out of anybody in the power rankings, or the longest odds, I should say, out of anybody in the power rankings this week. Number 6, the New York Knicks. The New York Knicks that are playing defense. The second quarter run that the Knicks went on against the Wolves in Minnesota on Thursday was one of their best stretches of basketball this season. It was a unit with Cam Payne, Deuce McBride, Mikal Bridges, OG Anunoby, and Karl Anthony Towns, and they put a straitjacket on the Wolves defensively. Perpetually got out in transition off of it. Great shot after great shot off of those pushes. They went from trailing to being up by 28 in the same quarter. A great example of what I've been talking about a lot over the course of this Knicks saga post the Karl Anthony Towns trade, which is all this obsession with rim protection. There's a great counter for rim protection, and it's perimeter defense. I would argue perimeter defense is more important than rim protection in the modern NBA. In the Knicks, there was a lot of not weaponizing their defensive talent in the early part of the season the way they're capable of. And it's been their defense that has turned their season around. They also got wins against Orlando and New Orleans in the 3-0 road trip. They've now won 8 out of 10. They have a 104.4 defensive rating in those 10 games. That's good for third best in the league over that span. Mikal Bridges is back guarding at a high level, and it's just trickled down from there. This is the path for the Knicks. Like, not just scoring a million points. Their offensive rating in the span is only 115.5. That's down considerably from where they were before that span, right? But they're winning more games. You're not trying to outscore teams. You're trying to be a better version of last year's Knicks. The gritty, hard-nosed, physical squad that defends and drags the game down in the mud and kicks your butt on the glass. That's how the Knicks win. But if you infuse that with additional offensive skill, that's where the real championship potential is. That team can win the title. Last year's Knicks with better offensive skill. The team that started this year, they can't win the title. But it's been a nice little proof of concept there with what we've seen from the Knicks in the last 10 games. They are plus 950 to win the title, plus 425 to win the Eastern Conference. Number 5, the Milwaukee Bucks. Took a loss without Dame to the Cavs after the in-season tournament, but I'm choosing to go positive with them. I thought the in-season tournament win was huge. It was also a proof of concept in the sense that they're capable of being a team that's a lead on both ends when they're committed to the task. Giannis's ability to pick defenses apart with his passing was on full display in that Thunder game. Dame going toe-to-toe with some of the best shot makers in the league. I thought it was a huge positive sign of what this Bucks team is capable of with their ceiling. They do have a relatively easy schedule in the next few weeks, though, which is huge because I watched with the Lakers last year. The in-season tournament kind of drained them, and they played really bad basketball for the next month. Obviously, a disappointing performance against Cleveland, but this easier stretch of their schedule will give them some time to cool off from the in-season tournament, which probably wore them down a little bit. But I'm really high on the Bucks. Giannis is playing at a special level, as close to Jokic as anybody in the league is right now. They're bought in, they're defending. I think they have real championship potential. If you agree with me, the Bucks right now are plus 1,800 to win the title, plus 800 to win the Eastern Conference. Number 4, the Dallas Mavericks. A 1-1 week. Both games were at home against the Clippers. Luka and Kyrie both sat out the first game and they lost. But then Kyrie comes back for the second game and they win comfortably. Kyrie had an off shooting night, but the rest of the guard core was great. Clay, Quentin Grimes, and Najee Marshall went 9 for 13 from 3 in that game. Spencer Dinwiddie dished out 6 assists. Another 5 offensive rebounds for Lively. I pulled this stat. This is crazy. Both Derek Lively and Daniel Gafford are top 5 in the NBA in offensive rebounds per 36 minutes. Among the 202 players to play at least 500 minutes. A huge part of Dallas's ability to win on the margins. They've got 2 really good centers that they don't have to play big minutes. So when they go out there, they can play their asses off just on end, and they do a lot of damage on the offensive glass with that. They have the Timberwolves and Suns this week for a couple tough games for them. They're plus 1,100 to win the title, plus 550 to win the conference. Number 3, the Boston Celtics, a 1-1 week. They dropped a game at home to the Bulls. They completely lost control of the game in the fourth quarter. One of the worst shifts I've ever seen Jalen Brown play. He legit just was not competing at the point of attack, and he was the main point of attack guy in that group. So the Bulls were just getting downhill every single time down the floor, and they were just slicing and dicing the Celtics. The Celtics also went cold from 3 in that game. They missed 42 threes, so they ended up getting a loss. But then 2 nights later, they went on the road into Chicago and just demolished the Bulls in one of their better performances this season. I talked last week about how Jason Tatum was in a slump and how it probably had mostly to do with his knee, and that I expected him to explode out of his slump soon. Well, 37 points, 13 rebounds, and 7 assists per game last week on 57% from the field and 50% from 3, 82% from the line. That's pretty dominant. 43, 13, and 10 in the win in Chicago. And now his shooting numbers are right back up where they needed to be. Back up over a point per pull-up jump shot when he had dipped below, up to 1.05 points per jump shot on the season. So as I talked about last week, just a random shooting slump. Tatum, red hot, got right back out of it. The Celtics right now, plus 240 to win the title, plus 105 to win the Eastern Conference. Number 2, the Oklahoma City Thunder. Obviously a disappointing end to the in-season tournament. You lose to the Bucks in a way that specifically exposes some flaws that have been concerning about the Thunder for a while, right? the lack of consistent perimeter shooting, questionable decision-making from their ball handlers. I also thought it exposed a hole in their defense, as a defense that, while they're very good with blitzing and rotating and putting two on the ball in that context, they struggle a little bit with hard help on drives and hard help on post-ups. Their rotations were not nearly as sharp. I thought that was something that stuck out. Dug into the numbers too, their ability to defend in rotation out of the post and on dribble drives is more middle of the pack compared to the rest of their defense. They did bounce back, though, with a couple of wins against Orlando and Miami. Still just a 108 offensive rating in those two games. So I'm wondering if the Thunder need to at least consider being more aggressive at this deadline in pursuit of offensive firepower or off-ball scoring. Like, even just a guy like Cam Johnson could be a huge asset to this team as a guy that's just like aggressively looking for his shot off the ball. The Thunder right now are plus 340 to win the NBA title and plus 165 to win the Western Conference. Lastly, this week, number one, the Cleveland Cavaliers back in the top spot after a 3-0 week. They beat Brooklyn. Easier schedule again. They got some injury luck too. They played the Bucks without Dame and the Sixers without Joel Embiid, but continuing to just beat the shit out of teams. They have the second best net rating in basketball. I talked about their offense struggling a little bit last week. It exploded out of that slump this week. As a team, they shot 45% from three last week. They made 61 threes total in the 3 games. That's going to get your offense right. Evan Mobley, a monster 22, 13, and 7 game against Philly, had a ridiculous left-handed dunk over KJ Martin and Andre Drummond on like a drive out of the elbow. His inverted ball screens, where he has a guard screen for him and then pop out, they are up to 74 points on 69 possessions this season. That's 1.07 points per possession, including passes. That's an excellent half-court play. Max Strus made his return in the Bucks game and was plus 20 in 19 minutes, hit 3 threes. Still forcing a ton of turnovers, still getting out in transition and running it down everyone's throat. Their tough West Coast road trip starts this Friday, though. And remember, that's the one, I think it's like Golden State, Dallas, Lakers, and Denver, I think. But they really tough games consecutively on the road in the West where they're going to play some tough teams. Now, here's the deal. I want to be clear. I believe in this Cavs team. I currently have them above the Knicks and the Bucks out east. That said, this road trip to me will be really revealing about their proximity to Boston. This is the type of road trip that if the Celtics went on it, they'd go 3-1 for sure, and they'd probably have a good chance to go 4-0. I think 3-1 should be the goal for this Cavs team. You go 3-1 on that West Coast road trip. I think that's a strong statement about how, yes, you're in the Eastern Conference, but you're still head and shoulders above these teams out in the West. I think that'd be a good chance for them to send that message. Cavs right now plus 1,600 to win the title, plus 650 to win the Eastern Conference. Again, all odds provided by our partner DraftKings. All right, guys. So quick little heads up on the schedule. I've been given orders from on high to take Tuesday and Wednesday off this week and next week. I have a tendency to work, and we need to take some time off for the holidays. We need our staff to take some time off for the holidays. So no new episode on Tuesday or Wednesday this week, but we'll be reacting to the Christmas Day games on Thursday. Jam-packed slate. We'll get into that. And then we'll have our usual mailbag on Friday before we get into next week. As always, I sincerely appreciate you guys for supporting me and supporting the show. Hope you guys get to spend some time with family over the course of the next couple of weeks, and I will see you guys on Thursday.